Hi everybody, this is Dr. Moriarty, and this is a introductory Allegro video that's going to show you how to use a keyboard to control a player. So it will have some basic bounds checking, so you can see here we can't go off of our game screen here. And you can't see it, but I am using the controller, not the controller, that's another video. I'm using the keyboard to control my player. This is really, most of this code I did find from the Allegro wiki, which is a super helpful website. Definitely check it out. I just altered it a little bit so it looks a little bit more like the code we use in my class, but not too many alterations. Okay, so we're only including the basic Allegro library, no helper libraries yet needed for this. We start off with a bunch of constants and globals. Constants are things that are not supposed to be changed anywhere else in your program except for right here. So I can alter this, and the cool thing is if you use them correctly, if you alter it here, you don't really have to adjust anything else in the rest of your game. So I'm going to go ahead and make my screen quite a bit wider, and because constants have been used appropriately in other parts, I don't have to like adjust the math that stops my player from walking off the screen, the math that does the bounds checking. So definitely get in the habit of using constants. I don't know why this is squiggle, by the way. There's no bugs. This is fine. I think that Visual Studio is just having a bit of a hiccup here. We also have an enumeration here. Remember, enumerations, you never have to use them. You actually never really have to use constants either. You can get away with regular variables, and numbers are what these are replacing. An enumeration is just kind of is basically a bunch of equalities saying, hey, whenever I say key up, I really mean 0, and whenever I say key down, I really mean 1. And you'll see this later in the code. It just makes it much easier to remember, much easier to read. So none of this stuff is actually needed, but I strongly recommend that you use them and try to get used to understanding them, because it just makes it's less work and it's much easier. Alright, that being said, let's move on to the stuff that you really, really do need. And to start off with, we've got some Allegro variables here. So Allegro kind of has its own variables that it makes just for its stuff. Display, obviously, you know what that is, hopefully, because you've made a display so far, but these other guys might be new. An event queue is kind of like, think of it as like a bucket that as things happen in the game, they all go into this bucket, and then the code's going to pick out different parts of different things that have been put in the bucket and deal with them individually. But it needs a place to hold all these things, these events that happen in your game in one place, and then it'll go through it individually. Your timer is exactly what it sounds like. It's like a little ticking clock that everybody, all the parts of your game kind of march in step to. So think of it kind of like the conductor for your game. And you can set this, we will set this up here. Right now our frames per second is set to 60. We're going to use that to be like the metronome for our timer. Okay, this is your player. The Allegro wiki calls it a bouncer. I usually change it so it says player or whatever. But this is your player. This is the thing that you are controlling. And it's a bitmap as opposed to a primitive, for those of you that know what it is. And the benefit of using a bitmap as opposed to a primitive to hold your player, the picture that's going to represent your player, is that you're later going to be able to upload an actual like JPEG or a sprite sheet or something like that. Right now, we're just going to draw something. We're just going to draw an empty square. To hold like a placeholder for it, and that empty square is going to be just a pink square for now. And in a later video I can show you how to actually put pictures into bitmaps. Okay? And for that you will need a helper library, but since we're not actually putting a picture in for this, we don't need that helper library. Okay, so here's regular old variables that are being used by the game, so nothing really Allegro based here. Floats, remember, just like doubles, they hold big numbers, they hold decimals. What we're doing is we're setting the player's X position to the middle of the screen. That's what all this funky math is. We say, hey, take the screen width, cut it in half, and then take the player's width and cut that in half, so you are directly in the middle of the screen. Same thing with the height. We're going to take the height, cut it in half, so you're in the middle of the screen. This array is going to hold keystrokes, whether you've pressed keys up or down. This runs your game, the render section of your game loop, and then this actually runs your game loop. This is the Boolean that's going to cause it to quit or not. Okay, whenever you run Allegro, you need to set it up with this. This is every single Allegro game you make is going to need to get initialized. And then if you have any helper libraries, that goes right underneath this. And then we're going to, in this case, because it is a keyboard input program, we're going to install the keyboard. If we were using a mouse or a controller, we'd want to pull that function instead. You must run this function before you can run any other Allegro functions, which is also why I waited to create the timer until I ran this. If you want to if you want to set the variable and create it at the same time, you could do that. I would just do something like this. I would say Allegro timer and then create it at the same time I declare it. Okay? So I'm actually not sure why the Allegro wiki likes to create as variables first. A lot of times I do this. You just have to do it after you initialize Allegro. So either way you want to do it is totally fine with me. So same thing here. We had to wait until we ran this to actually create the display that's held on by this variable. These next 3 lines, you set up the player. And this is really important, okay? Because I'm probably going to ask you to add a second player here. These 3 lines have to go together. You create the bouncer, the player, and he's being created as a 32 by 32 square. If you hover over that, it'll tell you what that constant is actually set to be. And then this says, hey, look at that player and set his color. If you try to put these in a different order, or try to create your second player right here, only the second player, only the bouncer 2 or whatever is going to get that color. So you need to, if you're creating a second player, you need to copy paste this entire 3 lines and put it right there if you want a second player controlled by different keys, okay? Other than that, order isn't hugely important with this, other than the fact that, of course, you need to initialize Allegro before you can call any Allegro functions. Okay. This stuff here, it's okay if it's not crystal clear. Just be aware of what these things are. As I mentioned, the event queue is kind of like a bucket that holds on to everything that happens in the game. Okay? These 3 lines are telling you what kind of things go in the bucket in this particular game. Display events, that's if we click this X button in your display, it'll recognize that as an event. Timer ticks, and keyboard. Alright? This one here just says, hey, from now on we're drawing everything to the display. The last thing before we start the actual game loop, which is right here, is we wipe the screen black so we have a nice clear screen. We flip that display so it actually is on the display, and then we start that timer ticking. Inside your game loop, if you have an event queue, the first thing you're going to do is going to create that and have it be looking for stuff. And then you're going to have 3 basic sections, and you're going to see this in pretty much every single game are these sections. You're going to have a timer section, and this is where the physics of your game, you can think of this as the physics engine of your game. You're going to have an input-output section, and in here I have display events. That's really small. It's just this is the only display event, is closing it. Key down, that's pressing a key down, and key up, that's letting go of a key. Okay? We'll talk about that in detail in just a second. And then down here at the bottom, I really recommend keeping, it doesn't really matter what order, you could have the input-output stuff first and then your timer section. But I really recommend you do have your render section at the end so you know, all your stuff is adjusted before you draw it at the end. Here's the end of your game loop. You're going to clean up your memory, get rid of all the stuff that you put into RAM. Kill the program. And by the way, return 0 tells the operating system hey, we're done here. You can take control again. By the way, everything was okay. Returning a -1 or some other value like that usually tells the operating system things didn't go as planned. Okay, so I'm actually not going to start talking about the timer section. Let's start with the input-output section. Not much to say here. Again, it's just saying, hey, did you press that X button? If so, let's kill the program. This is where the interesting stuff happens. So what's happening here is we are looking for an event time of a key press. Have we pressed a keyboard key? And then, if so, we've got the switch that looks for the different key cases. In this particular game, we're using up, down, left, right. But it would be really easy to alter it to run with, like, WASD. Or, if you're weird, you know, HJBN, I don't know, whatever you want. You can ask Allegro to look for any keyboard input you want. And what it does is, if this is pressed, that array we set up at the very beginning is we're going to change this value to true. Remember key up? See how it says 0 there? That's so we don't have to memorize the fact that the 0th slot is where I'm holding key up. If you wanted to say this, you could. But that's a lot harder to me than this to remember. And that is thanks to that enumeration that allows us to do that. Okay? But you don't have to. You could say 0, 1, 2, 3 if you wanted to. So we're setting that value as true. And then, and by the way, when you let it go, it sets it to false, so it's not there anymore. Then the timer section the next time around is checking to see, hey, do I have any like up values or down values or left values? And if so, I should move my player. Here's the actual movement here. Move left. Okay, if the down button has been pressed, we're going to move down. And don't be weirded out by this is a plus side, because remember in video games, the origin 00 is at the top. So adding is actually moving down, okay? Here we're moving left, here we're moving right. This stuff right here is my bounds checking. I'm saying, hey, if I've pressed up and I'm not at past the top of the screen, or if I've pressed down and I'm not at the bottom of the screen, or I've pressed left and I'm not on the left-hand side of the screen, or I've moved right and I'm not like on the past the edge of the right-hand side of the screen. So these two things have to be true. You have to press right and not be past the edge of the screen to actually be able to move right. So the second half is bounds checking. You don't have to have that if you don't want to. Like there are some games where it makes sense to allow your player to move off the screen. Maybe that like triggers some sort of a like a map change or something. But for the purposes of this game, we're going to leave it in. Okay, render section, nothing really new here. We're just wiping the screen so we don't leave that trail. Remember this cool thing that happens if you take this out? This is kind of the basis for our snake game actually later on in the semester. Okay, so this wipes the screen. This is actually drawing your player. So if you take this out, it's just a blank screen. Nothing really happens. And then this flips it from, because all this stuff just actually draws to memory. This actually flips everything from memory into the game screen. So yeah, hopefully that's enough information. Whether you're just making a second player, whether you're implementing this as a base code for another game, make sure that you do hold on to this. Like when this is working, email it to yourself, push it to GitHub, put it in your drive, whatever, because you're going to use this over and over and over again as base code. And once you have it written, you never have to rewrite it if you don't want to. And it'll save you a lot of time. So just be ready to copy paste this a bunch of times and add stuff to it as the base of other games. All right. Thank you for listening. Hopefully this was helpful. Good luck.